Welcome to Next Anatomy. The previous session we were talking about the spinal cord and their external features. And in this session, I'll be taking you to the remaining part, spinal meninges. So when you talk about the meninges are having three lining coverings that is called as Dura Mater, Arachnoid Mater, and the Pia Mater. When you study the cranium, we see the brain was being protected by cranial dura. And now we are studying the spinal cord. The spinal cord will be covered by spinal dura. Names are same, Dura Mater, Arachnoid Mater, and the Pia Mater. But ease of to remember and an important point to be catched over here is like the cranial dura is double layered, so I do name them as outer endosteal and inner meningeal layer. But the spinal dura is made up of single meningeal layer. So that's why in the cranial dura you might have encountered a word called as dural venous sinuses, that is called as Falx Cerebri, Falx Cerebelli. All these things will encloses the superior sagittal, inferior sagittal sinuses. All the sinuses you could able to study over there between the two layers of the outer endosteal and inner meningeal layer they could able to pass through. So that's why the cranial dura will be thrown into folds called as the Falx, but the spinal dura they do not make any folds. So that's why it's a single layer. And in the spinal dura, we will study about an important word called as epidural space that is absent in the cranial dura. So let me come back to the spinal meninges. The spinal dura extends from the foramen magnum. As previously we discussed while the conus medullaris from L1 that descend down as phylum terminale, and we have studied about the chorda equine. There I have showed you with the dotted lines at the level of S2 we were being covered by Dura Mater. So there itself we have named them as inner aspect of the phylum terminale as internum and externum we have named them. So I hope that you could able to recall that segment. So now here until to the S2 level you could able to see the extent. So now the first word to be remembered is like the space between the vertebral column, that is the vertebral canal, and the outermost layer of the spinal dura. It is called as epidural space. So now here in this diagram you could able to identify this is the vertebral column and try to see the first green color lining area here, the dura mater. So now between the vertebral column and the dura mater, try to see the blue color structures which was being mentioned as the vessels, that is the venous plexuses. They contains loose areolar tissue, semi-liquid fat, and intervertebral venous plexus. Dura mater, the green color lining, and the next one that is the arachnoid mater. So now remember the space between Dura mater and arachnoid mater is now termed as subdural space. Now this space itself, I'm going to name them as subdural space. And do remember that they contain scapulary layer of fluid. So we studied number one, epidural space, and we studied number two, subdural space. So the arachnoid mater is a thin, delicate, transparent avascular membrane which encloses the spinal cord loosely. And above it continues with the brain and below it reaches until to S2 level. Then moving on to the Pia Mater, which is very important, and it also will be asked as a separate questions also during examinations or short note questions as modifications of Pia Mater. So here we go with the modifications of Pia Mater and the definition. Pia Mater is thin, highly vascular membrane. See, arachnoid matter is avascular membrane, but here it is highly vascular membrane which encloses the spinal cord and is thin like thread-like prolongation which continues downwards from L1 level to the tip of the coccyx. I'm going to call them as phylum terminale. And the next word between the arachnoid matter and the Pia Mater, the third word we will be learning now, that is called as the subarachnoid space. So now this will be the green color one will be our Dura Mater. This will be our Arachnoid Mater. And this one will be our orange one will be a Pia Mater. Between the Arachnoid Mater and the Pia Mater, I could able to mention them as the subarachnoid space. So subarachnoid space is between the arachnoid and the Pia Mater, and they will be filled with the CSF that is called as the cerebrospinal fluid. So now, what are all the modifications of Pia Mater? As just now we discussed, phylum terminale. Second modification will be subarachnoid septum. Third modification will be linea splendescens. And the fourth modification will be ligamenta denticulatum. So now try to see here. So now this is the conus medullaris from L1 level to the lower down. You could able to see the total continuation of the phylum terminale. S2 is my landmark. Until L1 to S2, I am going to call them as phylum terminale internum. Beyond S2, I am going to call them as phylum terminale externum. So now the phylum terminale is a delicate glistening white thread-like structure extending from the tip of the conus medullaris almost at the level of L1 until to the tip of the coccyx. And its total length is 20 centimeters long. Out of that, phylum terminale internum will be 15 centimeters and the phylum terminale externum will be the 5 centimeters. So internum 15 centimeters, externum 5 centimeters, together it is 20 centimeters long in length. Then moving on to the subarachnoid septum. It connects the dorsal surface of the spinal cord. When you see now the cross section, so here I was being covered by Dura Mater. Then second level I was being encircled by Arachnoid Mater. So now automatically this is what subarachnoid space. So now we are trying to connect the dorsal surface. This is the level. I'm going to call them as connects the dorsal surface of the spinal cord with my arachnoid membrane. So that connection I'm going to call them as the subarachnoid septum, which is also one of the modification of the Pia Mater. Same likewise in this photograph, it was not mentioned over here in the anteromedian fissure level where I made the dotted lines over here. You could able to read them as the linea splendens, the Pia Mater gives off a septum in the anterior median fissure. Then moving on to the ligamentum denticulatum. It is a transparent ribbon-like thick bands of Pia Mater which extends laterally between the what is this one? Anterior root, spinal root. This will be our posterior spinal root. Then it forms a spinal nerve. So between these two roots, we could able to identify ligamentum denticulatum. Between both of the roots, you could able to identify the lateral margins of each band. Totally, we have 21 tooth-like processes. So why 21? So we could able to see 31 pairs of spinal nerves from L1 level I was being stopped, and from L2 to last all the 10 pairs will be moving out as the cauda equina. So remaining 21 pairs. So at every segment I could able to identify my tooth-like process that is called as ligamentum denticulatum, and they anchors the spinal cord in the subarachnoid space. And do practice. Then you could able to draw the subarachnoid septum here, then linea splendens and the ligamentum denticulatum, and with that the spinal meninges are done.